Our next speaker will provide our keynote for today, just as we welcomed the speaker yesterday at the opening plenary, who had a really grand perspective on our world and all of its beauty. So does our speaker today, Luis Benitez. Luis ranks among mountain climbers as one of the most experienced and respected guides in the world. He has summited the top of the famed 7 summits an extraordinary 32 times, including being a 6-time summiteer, a word I've never heard of before, but a summiteer of Mount Everest. In addition to managing expeditions on the most remote peaks on the planet, Luis works to tie the lessons from the outdoors back to the challenges of life and business. He helped create the nonprofit Trekking for Kids, which focuses on service-based expeditions that allow participants to climb and trek while learning about issues like healthcare for orphans around the world. He also played a role in developing Warriors to Summits, which serves returning veterans by connecting them with the outdoors. Throughout all of his work, Luis has managed and led programming in Ecuador and Chile for the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. He also has made a deep personal investment in public service. First by serving as a town councilman in Eagle, Colorado, and now as the first state director for the Outdoor Recreation Industry Office for the state of Colorado. Given everything he's done and everywhere he's been, I'm really excited to hear where he's going to take us now. So, Luis, please come on up.
Thank you, Andrew. Good morning, everybody. It's truly an honor to follow you onto this stage. I'm truly humbled by the work that you've done over the past few decades. And just please, ladies and gentlemen, another round of applause for Will Rogers. You know, some of the comments that Will wrapped up his talk with were spot on when it comes to where we are right now in truly unprecedented times. I find myself using that word quite often these days. And I would venture a guess that everyone in this room, the work that you do every single day, is connected to your personal story. That magic and that passion of being able to connect who you are with what you get to do every single day. And I think in the midst of unprecedented times, it's really important to understand how to connect to that passion, how to revisit the things that brought you to this moment in time, and those stories that truly define why you do what you do. So today I'd like to share a couple of things with you. First, a little bit about my personal journey. How do you get from here to there? Summiteer, it's kind of a weird word. You're right, Andrew. And people often ask, why would you choose to do Everest 6 times? That's a little crazy. And how does that connect to conservation and stewardship and what we're trying to do as an overall economy and ecosystem representing the outdoor industry within the entire country? So then at that point, what I'd like to do is share with you what that ecosystem looks like, truly, in my opinion, defining the work that we do collectively. And then lastly, what can our call to action be? How should it be shaped? What can we believe in moving forward? So most people know me as a mountaineer, to Andrew's introduction. But the reality of my journey and my intersection with not only public lands, but also the outdoor industry started at a very, very early age at my American grandfather's sporting goods store, about a quarter mile away from my grade school. He was the first Orvis dealership in the Midwest in St. Louis, Missouri. So really, in the beginning, walking down to a small family-owned specialty retail shop, waiting for my parents to pick me up every single day, I just thought it was fun to play with the fly fishing rods and reels, all the different camouflage clothing. But then I noticed something else that my grandfather's store had in it. In the back of his store, he had this tiny little room with couches and a little refrigerator. And what I noticed was, because he not only carried unique products for the community, but also served as a gathering point to talk about conservation, wildlife mitigation, and conservation, a lot of politicians, a lot of champions of industry would come by at the end of their day just to sit around and have a galvanized conversation about what it meant to be part of that community. And so even then I realized that there was a deep connection between the industry that the outdoor community drives and the ethic behind it. And so before I could even really hold the shotgun up or walk out onto the levee to go duck hunting, I realized that these places were special. Not just to be able to engage in the sports that we choose, but also just for the appreciation and the spirit that that engagement brings. Now, through the years, this led me to Colorado to a very unique organization, and it's ironic. I actually spent some time this morning with a couple of really dear friends that worked with me at Outward Bound. How many people know what Outward Bound is? Oh, I love being in a room of friends. That's beautiful. You know, these days, when I think of Outward Bound and I think of all that it entails, not only teaching the technical skills that are required to take young adults into the backcountry, but also the soft skills that it translates. How do you find the leadership skills that you need to bring you through moments of adversity and challenge? How do you define tenacity? And as the years go by, especially now, I'm often drawn to Outward Bound's mission statement over and over again, which for those of you that are lovers of poetry and literature, know that this credo was borrowed from Alfred Lloyd Tennyson, from Ulysses: to serve, to strive, and not to yield. Now, I would argue everybody in this room understands exactly what service is. You know exactly the things that are required to give of yourself to the things that are most important to you, your family, and your communities. I would also argue that there's nobody in this room that does not understand the effort required to strive towards those goals. Yet today, in these unprecedented times, I am not sure if we understand what it means not to yield. How do we choose those spots that we want to put a stake in the ground? And really, I'm glad that Andrew shared a couple of anecdotes about Everest, because these questions that we ask ourselves right now, they are globally ubiquitous. Spending a decade on this mountain, yes, it was about human endeavor. Yes, it was about pushing past the limits of what you thought or what you perceive as possible, but it was also very simple questions and a very simple equation. How do we take care of this precious resource that we have? How do we market it? How do we promote it? How do we preserve it? And how do we teach the next generation just how important all of those things are? Guiding the 7 summits, the highest mountain on each of the 7 continents, these questions were always the same. Even on Mount Vinson in Antarctica, where an international charter would ask these questions. And you know, the reality of spending time on these mountains and understanding everything from watersheds to complex alpine ecosystems to forestry and regeneration of communities through the interaction with some of these natural resources, this belief that there is a connection between the economy and these resources started to grow. We all have stories of these magic moments. We all have stories, whether in an urban or a rural setting, of how these magical moments deeply drive the things that we choose to do. It's where we go to be inspired. It's where we go often to work out some of the things that we see in front of us. But I would argue it's also the same place where we keep learning how to put one foot in front of the other and defining that process of choosing not to yield. Now, the mission, I could argue collectively, especially for a new office for the state and a new office for the country, is pretty simple. We want to champion industries, communities, and people to come to life through the great outdoors. I think you could probably look up anybody's mission statement involved in a private industry or a public industry connected to the outdoors, and you're going to find some piece of this. Yet the reality is, how are we going to tell that collective story moving into the future, especially when the definitions are changing rapidly? How many people in the room mountain bike? Just out of curiosity. Yeah. Does anybody remember back when there were no suspension systems on the bike? How much fun that was? Felt like you needed dental surgery at the end of your ride? but we still did it. It was still fun. We still worried about those trail systems. We still wanted to make sure that parking lot was good. It's where we cracked open a beer at the end of our ride. We appreciated those beautiful moments. Yet the definitions of how we recreate are rapidly changing. The sports are changing. The picture in the upper left-hand corner, there is a whole generation of people that define mountain biking like this now. High-angle vertical pump tracks in urban and suburban and rural parks. And people complain all the time, it's just so tough to get our message out there. We want to let people know the work that we do and why it's so important. And boy, the marketing budget this year, we just don't have it. I share this picture in the bottom right-hand corner for that specific reason about translating this message and just how easy it is because we have something that everybody wants. This is a bluegrass band, friends of mine in Eagle, Colorado. They have a little piece of cardboard, and they put it out in front of every concert that they have, written in magic marker, "Wish you were here." Every tourist that is in their audience picks up that piece of cardboard, takes a picture in front of a beautiful cottonwood tree, puts it on social media, and all of their friends, regardless of wherever they are in the country, follow along and like it. Don't tell me we can't translate this message to people that want what we have. Don't tell me that we can't translate and define the things that are the most important to us and build our constituency stronger. Because the next generation does not know the things that we know. They're better than us. They're already smarter than us. They're quicker than us. This picture in the upper right-hand corner, I'm going to use to illustrate that example. How many people in the room learned how to canoe in an old aluminum Grumman canoe? Anybody? Yeah. Remember that experience when it was about 72 degrees outside? If the canoe was in the sunshine, miraculously, the canoe was about 180 degrees. And when you sat down, your butt and your hands were always black from the aluminum. And that's the way I learned how to paddle as well. And I went to visit this group of campers in Denver, Colorado, who were going to take their first paddling class out on a lake. And so I approached this group with my baggage, my historical baggage about their modality of recreation and what that could or should be. And I turned to this little boy with the yellow hat on backwards and I said, "Oh, this is great. You're going to go out and paddle. Where are your canoes?" And he turned and looked at me and he said, "Canoes? Like the Native Americans used?" My dad's a stand-up paddleboarder and we stand up paddleboard and I'm going to learn how to sup. Now, if I would have told you 5 years ago with $450 and no swiftwater rescue training, no knowledge of a riparian environment or what a watershed even means, you could walk into Costco and buy an inflatable surfboard and a paddle and toddle down any river you wanted to, you probably would have told me I was nuts. Yet here we are in the middle of a multi-million-dollar, multinational industry that does just that. And it's not just the hardcore that are showing up to do these things. It is mothers, fathers, grandparents, all the kids. Anybody here ever try stand-up yoga on a paddleboard? Yeah, you get hurt and wet at the same time. But it's this brand new intersection with outdoor recreation and an opportunity to engage and educate the next generation on what we do. And I share this picture to illustrate that point. Waterway education, people on the water, riparian environment on the shore, and you can see that parking lot in the background, that trailhead, where that ubiquitous kiosk always is. What are we doing to shape and tell that story to these emerging economies within our ecosystem? Now in Colorado here, we have some pretty iconic resources. Over 54 peaks, over 14,000 feet. And if you're traveling to Colorado, people always say, they put it on the list. We're going to go for a hike. We're going to get on the water. And if we're strong enough, or some say crazy enough, we're going to try a couple of 14ers. How many people in the room have done a 14er? Not bad. Multiple 14ers. Anybody have done all the 14ers? Like our lieutenant governor? Anyone? Some have that as a life goal. Yet the realization through a couple of independent studies recently that there's over $24 million in existing trail damage on our 14ers, yet a corollary study showing that there's over $80 million in ancillary economic spending in the towns that surround these resources, 2 and 2 isn't making 4 anymore. In my mind's eye, that means that we're falling down when it comes to education about defining not only what's most important, but how it connects to the larger picture of what we do and how we do it. Now, I know this is a silly question for this room, but I just love seeing hands go up this early in the morning. How many people have done trail work in the room? Wonderful. Would you agree that it's really calm, quiet, not difficult work? Yeah. Anybody ever go back to the place where they worked on the trail, kicked that water bar, wiggled that rock a couple years later, just to see if the work that you've done still stands? There's this feeling of pride, and I would argue that in this day and age, in this era, that pride to still lean into that work, to still define that importance around that work, ultimately requires courage. Now, how we define this moving forward, I think, is going to be important when it comes to our economy, our ecosystem, and how the conservation of public lands and waters does spark sustainable economic development. For us, in our office, there are 4 states that have a role like mine. By January, there will be 9 states. By the spring, there will be 11. How will we galvanize all of those voices for the states that we represent into one consolidated political voice and platform for what we do? How do we define the sparking of sustainable economic development to conserve public lands and waters? Because these are the numbers that we're talking about. Over $887 billion in consumer spending for the outdoor industry in the United States. Over 7.6 million American jobs. And do you know that that number is about as big as the auto industry and the pharmaceutical industry in the United States combined? Now, I want everyone in this room to ask yourself the question, if we are that big, and if we do have that capacity and that strength, how are we telling this collective story? Why are we begging for conservation and stewardship instead of defining the path forward for how we do this? Anybody know a guy like this? He's actually going to remain nameless because I think he actually might be in the room today. I don't know. But he is in private land conservation. That is his job, day to day. But his other job is as an entrepreneur and an innovator. And the premise is really simple. He was sick and tired of biking back and forth to the grocery store and with a list from his wife and not having enough room on his bike to carry everything home. So he stole a cart from the grocery store, brought it home, and welded it to the front of his bike in his garage. I would argue that the outdoor industry in our economy and this inspiration from these green spaces that we all protect and preserve drives this level of entrepreneurship. And through this, yeah, there were a couple of friends that called him crazy. And there were a couple of friends that said, you know what, if you actually build something out of it like this, I'll give you $100. I'll give you $50. Because I think it'd be really great to have a product not only from our town, but that could actually help us utilize some of these spots for recreation. $1,000, $1,500. And all of a sudden, a year and a half later, the first full suspension, fat tire e-bike, mountain bike. And he donated the first 3 that he constructed to the trail crews that preserved and protected the trails that he loved to ride so much. So notice, because this is a trail crew bike, notice the chainsaw beer combination on the bike. Very, very effective. But the reality is that this economy is evolving rapidly. Anybody here own an e-bike? Ever ridden an e-bike before? They're wonderful as commuter vehicles, but now we're getting to the point and having the conversation where do we allow them on dirt trails? And if we do, what is their level of investment in conservation? Now, you may say to yourself, that's a dirt bike, I don't know. How does that fit with land conservation? That just seems way out of our wheelhouse. Multi-billion-dollar, multinational industry. And I'm going to point to northwestern Arkansas for a moment, in Bentonville, Arkansas, where the Walton family, the Walmart family, really wanted to have an integrated mountain bike trail system to not only drive recreation in town and public health and wellness, but to also deepen the value proposition of what it meant to get people to move to town. Bentonville, Arkansas. Now, the trail system that they created through a connecting of private land grants and trusts is extraordinary. It's world-class. And they do not differentiate between an e-bike, a single speed, a mountain bike, a unicycle. It doesn't matter, because that trust is so strong and that spirit of volunteerism in town is so strong. There have been recent global summits connected to the cycling industry held in Bentonville, Arkansas. Think about that paradigm shift. How much potential that holds if we can understand how to collectively tell this story. Because I don't know how many people in the room have ever dirt biked. Seems like there's a lot of mountain bikers, but we know these two communities don't necessarily hang out together all that well. Yet in the backcountry, with regards to land and trail preservation, these are the kind of relationships I'm beginning to see. The acknowledgement of the fact that we all believe the same thing. We stand for similar things. How can we tell that collective story? Continuing down this path of trying to encourage paradigm shifting with your thoughts, consider the ski industry for a second, an industry that's been known for one thing and one thing only for over 50 years in the United States. Yet with the passage of the Summertime Operations Bill, to not only try to help ski towns become year-round economies, but to also understand how to interact with national forests in a different way. Now you have high-angle ropes courses on these mountains. You have canopy tours that would rival anything you would find in Costa Rica, with a mandate from the Forest Service through partnerships with organizations like the Nature Conservancy that environmental education needs to be the cornerstone of the work that you do with some of these activities. Connecting the magic of who you are with what you do every single day. In my opinion, that does drive innovation while cultivating those healthy outdoor lifestyles that we all want to promote. Now, I know what you're thinking. This half of the room is thinking the outdoor industry from Colorado, that guy is nuts. The other half of the room is thinking, before I go camping with my 10 friends, I got to go home to Home Depot and get a rake, because that is genius. How do you cook dinner for 10 friends really quick over a campfire? You know, Steve Jobs used to have this meeting with all of his new employees at a senior level. He used to gather them in a conference room or a ballroom, much like this. And he used to say out loud, you know, chances are you wanted to come and work for this company because you're deeply passionate about what we do. Chances are you want to come work for this company because that passion is driving some idea, some level of innovation in your head. But I would guess right now, being part of such a large and iconic company, you're a little timid, you're a little scared to say that idea out loud. Because you don't know if the people around you will acknowledge this idea or just call you plain crazy. I want you to bring those ideas to life here. I want you to understand that the person to your left and the person to your right in this room will help you galvanize that idea into a reality. And is the one idea that you think everybody is going to call you crazy for today, in 10 years will they say, that is absolutely genius. So in these unprecedented times, in this era of a VUCA world, as Will put so succinctly, these resources towards workforce training while deepening those educational opportunities for our communities, is it enough? Do we actually now begin to teach people, our communities, and our ecosystem what it means to not yield? Now, you know, I share this picture with you as I wrap up my comments, a little tongue-in-cheek, but also to illustrate a very important point. This has been hanging in my office for years. And I've often looked at it over the years and thought, it stands as a definitive reminder of why we do what we do, albeit somewhat in a cartoonish way. Yet today, in this moment, and in our time, and in our era, will this be what people remember? Of this simple struggle at the end of a complete overrun of what we choose to hold dear? Is that what we will be defined as? Is that what we will be defined by? Because I think you know, just as well as I do, this is not about us anymore and that our time is rapidly drawing to a close. And the definition of what comes next is going to be as extraordinary as we allow it to be. So in closing, this idea that you have that might seem too out of the box for the work that you do, e-bikes, stand-up paddleboards, do we let them on trails? Do we talk to these other communities? How do we celebrate diversity? That idea that everyone thinks crazy, someday will the next generation look back and not only say thank you, but say it was simply genius. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.